Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait until the Zoom webinar populates. We'll be with you in just a moment. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Meet the Mayoral Candidates. Just a little bit about CCIM and BOMA. CCIM was established in 1975, and BOMA is the primary source of information on office building development, leasing buildings, operating costs, energy consumption patterns, and technological developments. You can check out both of our websites to find out more. Just some housekeeping items for today. Please use the Q&A icon to post all your questions. We will not be answering questions from the chat feature. And we are recording today's webinar, and everyone will get a copy of that shortly after the webinar. I do blind copy everyone, so please check your junk. We'd like to thank all of our CCIM sponsors for whom in this challenging year we would not be able to operate. So thank you all for supporting CCIM. I will turn it over to BOMA now.
Hi, aloha everyone. My name is Nicole Nakano. I'm this year's president-elect. At this time, I would like to thank all of our BOMA sponsors and especially our platinum sponsors with ABM, Belfour Restoration, Interstate Hawaii, MD Restoration, Pacific Rim, Glass Tinting, Premier Restoration, and SP Plus. Next slide. Thank you. And just sharing some BOMA upcoming Hawaii events. Please be on the lookout for the e-blast from Pacific Rim Glass Tinting in lieu of their webinar. And our next member program is going to be Networking 2.0.2.0, which is Tuesday, November 10th. It's going to be this fun virtual event with different chat rooms, breakout rooms, and just a lot of fun games and interaction and just connecting with our members too. And our next Lunch and Learn is going to be with ABM. They're going to be sharing some new methods of cleaning electric static spray, which is Tuesday, November 17th. And we also have our holiday social and board installation coming up on Wednesday, December 2nd. And last but not least, we have our Lunch and Learn with SP Plus on Wednesday, December 9th. And on behalf of BOMA Hawaii, thank you for attending today's event.
So for CCIM, we have a webinar coming up. This is with PATA, and CCIM is sponsoring that. It's Reimagining Tourism on October 14th. We'll have the new President and CEO of HTA speaking along with a few other people. We have a very Halloween webinar about title insurance, horror stories from an undertaker / underwriter. And then we are an event that's in the works is Vegas, Hawaii, Vegas as the 9th island, and how 2 tourism-dependent economies are coping. And finally, we have the forecast. It's back, and Yoda is saying cloudy is the future, or the future is, sorry. Registration will be coming soon. And then, as you all know, CCIM is raising money for Make-A-Wish Hawaii. All of the money stays local. We are asking that if you can possibly donate during these challenging times, please do. Here is the website. I will also put that in the chat to everyone if you'd like to donate. We are almost at our goal, so please, please, if you can help us, we'd very much appreciate it. And now I'd like to turn it over to our President-elect, Ryan Ng. Ryan, take it away.
All right, thank you, Tina. Again, Ryan Ng here on behalf of CCIM and BOMA, and I'm glad to be your moderator here today. You know, we're really excited to have you here. We've got about 3 weeks left until the election day, and like many of you folks, like me, we were probably undecided as to whom we would be voting for come election day. So we wanted to take this opportunity, this mayoral forum, to take time out of the busy candidate schedule so we can better see how they stand on a myriad of issues facing our city and county. So first of all, congratulations to both candidates, Keith Amamiya and Rick Blangiardi, for making it this far down the line. From an initial list of candidates, we're close to about 10 of them, and you had some pretty big political stalwarts on that list of candidacies, and they made it down to the final two, billing themselves as non-establishment candidates. And obviously the voters voted and stated they wanted someone from the outside to bring change to Honolulu Hale. So you'll get a chance to see both of their backgrounds and see where they stand on the issues. So I want to introduce Keith Amamiya. Keith Amamiya, during the past 40 years, has served Oahu in a variety of different roles as a community leader, a nonprofit executive, business executive, and a lawyer. Please don't hold that against him, for any lawyers out there. But for those 12 years, he served as the executive director of the Hawaii High School Athletics Association, where he was known for spearheading the Save Our Sports campaign, which was a way to save the high school and junior varsity sports during that tough 2009 year where there were a bunch of state budget cuts. And to this day, he's elevated high school sports as a way to positively impact student lives. And so a little bit about his professional background. He was most recently the senior VP over at Island Holdings, the parent group of Island Insurance. He's also served at the University of Hawaii Board of Regents as their executive administrator, secretary, and their civil litigation attorney. He's served on numerous community boards, include the Honolulu Police Commission and the Hawaii State Board of Education. Keith, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And next up, we've got Rick Blangiardi. Rick, you guys know him probably from TV. He's been behind the scenes, though, as a former media executive who is well known as being the longtime GM over at Hawaii News Now. And prior to returning to Hawaii, he led TV stations all over the mainland, and notably was the president of Telemundo, the country's second largest Hispanic network. And he's also served our country, served in the US Navy for 6 years. We got Navy. And he's also involved with sports as the associate head football coach and defensive coordinator over at the University of Hawaii. He also contributes a lot to the nonprofit community. He was the president of the executive board at the Boy Scouts of America Aloha Council, chair of the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii, president of Nakoa UH Football Booster Club, and has served on the boards of the American Red Cross and Hawaii Food Bank, just to name a few. So Rick has a Master of Education from the University of Hawaii and a bachelor's from Springfield College. Rick, glad you're here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan.
So the way that's going to work today, we asked our CCIM and BOMA members for their top 3 questions that are burning on their minds that they wanted to ask the candidates. And so of those top 3, we whittled it down to a list of a top 10 that we hope to get through here today. A lot of questions, so we had to institute a little bit of rules here to make sure we can get through all of them. So the way it's going to work is we're going to give each candidate 90 seconds to answer the question. They'll take turns. And to keep us on track, we've got a timer. Tina, the timer here, will be giving the candidates a 30-second warning. And then at 90 seconds, she'll also be raising their hand. And that's the cue to basically yield the floor and let the other person speak. But not to worry, we'll have adequate time, after the initial question to ask follow-up questions. We can have a discussion and to get clarifications on things that the candidates have mentioned. So all I ask is that you guys don't make me become the next Chris Wallace over in the presidential debates. That was painful for him. He was more like a WWF referee, I think, than a moderator. But I think we're amongst the congenial crowd here. So
Ryan, we haven't done that even close yet. We haven't done that.
Just throwing it out there. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. And let's talk initially about the big elephant in the room in terms of our economy and the COVID. News that came out this morning, and this came out from Colliers, stating that Hawaii actually leads the nation right now in closure of businesses. We have more closures here than any other state apparently. And so, we all know maybe some of our favorite establishments have gone out of business, and some of them are still shut down. Some of these restaurants and bars probably, won't be coming back. And so, what I'd like to know is, from you, how has this current administration handled the reopening during the pandemic, and how would you, as mayor, do it differently when you take over next year? Let's begin with Keith on that question.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ryan, for the opportunity, and Tina and Nicole for helping put this together. As you mentioned, before running for mayor, I was the senior vice president at Island Holdings, and one of the subsidiaries was Tradewind Capital Group, which is heavily involved in commercial real estate. So I see Kent Walters in the audience. I want to say hi to him, a fellow colleague, and I don't know if Richard Lim's in the audience, but I work with them in the commercial real estate field, and I'll be the first to say I just know enough to be dangerous, but I am familiar with the field, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. This is an unprecedented situation. The administration currently is doing the best they can. I thought they did a good job with the first stay-at-home order, nipping the spread of COVID in the bud, so to speak, but there's a lot of room for improvement since then. Communication could be improved. The public is confused, I think even to this day, about the 4 different tiers. They were confused before that in terms of what we could and couldn't do. There was miscommunication or lack of communication between the state and city as to who can do what. So communication clearly can be better to the public in general. I also would have relied much earlier on data, science, medical professionals, and the like in terms of how to deal with COVID. Again, there was uncertainty as to how to deal with COVID. The public was in the dark, and so I certainly would have relied on data and science much sooner. I would have distributed the money from the $387 million in CARES Act funding that the city received to the general public and small businesses in general much sooner. And then finally, I would have started much more testing, contact tracing, and quarantining and isolation during the second stay-at-home order and since then. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Keith. Rick, your response on the COVID response.
Well, first of all, I also want to thank you for the opportunity today, and all of you have been involved. I've known Tina a long time, so it's I welcome this challenge, if you will, to answer the questions. And then to that regard, I wasn't even aware of the statistic that you opened up with, Ryan, and that's just how fluid things are that we lead in closures, which is pretty daunting. So I've made it a practice not to second guess our elected officials. I don't see any merit in doing that. But I would say that I felt for a long time that, what we're facing with as far as balancing public health and safety and now an economic recovery all at the same time was a very daunting task. I have worked with small businesses for many, many years, thousands of them over the years in broadcast business. And not unlike the shift in our demographics of people living paycheck to paycheck, 50% of our population, families, that's also been true of what is the backbone of our business community. More than 95% of the businesses registered a DBED employ 20 or fewer people. So if I would look at credit apps over the years of really hardworking people, a lot of them had very little surplus. And so when we shut down initially, I understood that because it was very terrifying. What we were seeing coming out of New York, the pictures, the vulnerability of being island dwellers, and everything and anything you could possibly imagine was very scary. But we initially shut down to get our hospitals ready. And we were supposed to open up. And the bottom line is we didn't, we extended that. And candidly speaking, if there's anything I've been harshly critical of, it's deeming that so many of our small businesses being deemed in a broad stroke as non-essential has really been its own form of economic suicide. So in that regard, would have handled things very differently, understanding the economics of this marketplace. Thank you.
So, you mentioned balancing the public health with the, health of the economy. And, many would believe that maybe we've gone a little bit too far in some of these lockdown and the procedures. So, we can't really affect what would happen in the past, but we can only look towards the future. But, how would you guys specifically help the businesses that are teetering or even, businesses that need to reopen and that have gone out of business and need to reopen?
We're gonna all okay. Okay. So every time I'll ask. Look, first of all, it's a function of money, and I've been really concerned about the fact that the city has been very slow on distributing the CARES Act money, and actually, quite honestly, it's appeared to be appalling from the standpoint of that actual execution. I thought the state did much better in the PPP money, and they got some $2.5 billion out to some 28,000 businesses, of which is still another 11,000 are pending. But that said, good public health and a stable economy are not exclusive. And we went for the good public health, which I understood, but there was no balance on the other side. And so, to the best of our ability, on the science that we know and the data, everything was saying that you want to, wear masks, socially distance. We've asked a lot of businesses to set up protocols. I was in my former television station today, and the newsroom has got all of these things up that I never saw before, dividers and stuff. But, so I would say that, that we could have trusted our local people to allow people to get back to business with those protocols, smaller businesses that were really needed, that would not have been the site of creating COVID. We didn't, not large gatherings or whatever, but everybody got swept as non-essential, yet the big box stores stayed open and they've been thriving in this scene. So I think it's that sensitivity, as I said a few moments ago, to our local economy and the profile of that local economy and our small businesses was really lacking in this regard. It went on way too long. Thank you.
And what do you think, Keith? Did the pendulum swing too far in your mind on businesses and them hurting? What would you do to help?
Well, one of the things I would have done differently in the second shutdown, Ryan, is I wouldn't have been so restrictive on small businesses operating. I thought it was unfair that mainland big box retailers were allowed to be open while small businesses were not. And I think that there could have been some kind of compromise reached that would allow small businesses to open with the same restrictions as the big box retailers. Regulate how many people can go into your store at one time, but to shut many of them down completely was a huge hardship on them, Ryan, obviously. And so I wouldn't have done that. But there is a balance. You need healthy people, you need a healthy community before you can reopen. And so, we're not privy to the information that the current administration was privy to. So I don't know, if it was too soon, too late, but that's part of the problem in terms of lack of communication, that we were kind of kept in the dark as to how long we were going to be on lockdown and when it'll reopen and what it will take to reopen. But in terms of helping small businesses now, Ryan, there's the Small Business Recovery Fund that the city has. They already issued gave out $60 million to small businesses several months ago. $75 million was made available quite recently to them. The city just needs to get that into small businesses' hands as soon as possible. And finally, the state is working on a small business commercial rent relief fund, and that needs to get into the hands of small businesses as well. Thanks.
So, the big key, to bringing back our economy, of course, is going to be bringing back tourism. It's a huge part of our economy. And so, as mayor, what would you do to bring the tourism back to Honolulu right now? And, build back the consumer spending is one thing to have the tourists come back, but, will they spend? And how can we get them to spend? Keith?
So, well, we need to start with some kind of plan. And I know the state currently has a pre-testing plan so that tourists who come here can avoid the 14-day quarantine. Until we're able to remove that 14-day quarantine requirement, it's obviously going to be tough to have tourism rebound. No one wants to be quarantined for 14 days before they're allowed to start their vacation. No one can afford that. No one wants to be cooped up for 14 days. And no one can take that much time off for the most part. So the state needs to come up with a plan that will be balance the needs of public safety with reopening the economy. And so that's for starters, Ryan. But in the long run, we need to work on a healthier version of tourism. The days of 10 million tourists a year coming to Hawaii are hopefully long past. That was simply too many tourists. It was overburdening our infrastructure. Our communities were getting overrun by tourists. I feel that we need to grow tourism smarter, work on and focus on higher end tourists, and then also diversify our economy into other areas like agriculture, aquaculture, and renewable energy so that we're not overly reliant on tourism like we are now. Thanks.
Rick, do you agree with Keith's view on trying to diversify the tourism and
I don't know if we
relying on the
necessarily,
state?
I don't know if we agree or disagree. I just, in my perspective, I tell you, in this world right now where I don't remember the last time I've ever felt so uncertain about so many things. We're all dealing with that. I think one of the certainties, though, in the midst of everything, is the appeal of Hawaii on a global basis. This is an iconic, very special place. And for those of us privileged to live here, we probably know that more than most. But I do think from a leisure market standpoint, Hawaii is going to be a premium project and people really would love to come here. And it remains to be seen right now because it takes people who have disposable income, and the whole country's been impacted, to start to book vacations and how it comes back. And as Governor Ige said today in the paper, it doesn't expect it to start rushing back. So all of that said, we have a chance to do something here. Absolutely agree. 2019 was an overrun. And the scary thing about it was 2019 was an increase of 5% over 18, and 2020 was projected to be a 5% increase over 2019. In the first year, projected to break 11 million visitors. Way too much for this infrastructure. So the bottom line is, I think we're going to have to protect our people here with tourism coming in. That's probably the biggest threat right now. So whatever testing procedures, even the retest, if we get to do it here, will be good to protect our hotel workers. But make no mistake about it, tourism is huge to our economy, and we need to bring it back smart. I believe in quality over quantity, but we need to get back into the business of welcoming visitors. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to talking about the other big elephant in the room, and that's the rail project, kind of more like a gorilla in the room. Of course, our state's largest infrastructure project in state history started over 10 years ago and was promised by the officials at the time it would be done in 2019. Here we are in 2020, it's not even halfway finished, and we're several $1 billion over budget. So I want to know, do you guys support the rail project and finishing it all the way down to Ala Moana Center? Because as you know, the financial will has been waning, the political will has been waning for the project. So I want to know where you guys stand on that. And if you guys do support the rail project, how will you as mayor hold Hart accountable to prevent more of these cost overruns and to really keep this from being a long-term burden on the taxpayers? Rick?
Yeah, Ryan, that's a phenomenal question right now because we've all been talking about rail throughout this campaign, and look at the events of this past week. So anything I'm going to say right now is speculative, if you will, from the standpoint of what we're really dealing with, because nobody knows. Even our current mayor, who's been in office for 8 years rather, just stated that he doesn't know where Hart is at. So this is a big loaded question. So fundamentally, I've always been a proponent of rail. I voted for the rail project in its design from East Kapolei to Ala Moana. Began raising questions during the course of the summer and looking at no GET money, unemployment that went from low of 2% up to 22.5%, et cetera, and the impact of our economy. This is more than a transit project. This is a huge real estate project, as this group probably knows. The TOD is so integral to rail and the success of it. So my belief and my feeling is, we've got to do everything we possibly can to figure out how we can build it. We have to come down through the pass of the Dillingham corridor. Those stations are critical and related to all of our transit-oriented development, what we want to get done in the urban core with affordable rentals, et cetera. How far we can take it, we've got to be honest right now, with this pandemic remains to be seen. We're gonna have to reestablish some trust with the FTA. They're still holding $744 million. They've not released that. And I think we've just learned by what just happened with the P3 and the comments made that the monies that were designed to spend are not enough. We're gonna need a lot more federal relief. So I could go on this for an hour. I'll stop it right here. Thank you.
So just to confirm, Rick, do you support it going all the way to Ala Moana?
I do. That has been the project all along, and there's a lot of merit to it. The challenge is going to become how do we pay for that? How do we do that?
Keith, what are your thoughts on the rail project?
So from the beginning, Ryan, I've been in favor of completing rail all the way to Ala Moana. But like everyone else, I'm just as frustrated and upset about rail from the planning stages up to the present. And basically, it comes down to leadership and lack of political will right now. We need new leadership. We need someone that's going to take the bull by the horns and make sure that rail is completed all the way to Ala Moana. And I'm committed to doing that. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a challenge, but it's important for our economy and our city's future in so many ways. First, it's about transportation equity. The people from West Oahu deserve a viable means, a viable way to get into town and to go back home every day. Being stuck in traffic for hours on end each way is simply not a way to live. So it's about helping them improve their quality of life. Every major city, every vibrant city has a quality rail system. Many people in this audience are like me, have been lucky to go to other cities and see how successful it works, whether it's Tokyo, Singapore, or Vancouver. The other important component of rail is transit-oriented development. That's a huge economic opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to build much needed affordable housing along the rail line and especially at the rail stations, like we've seen successfully done in other cities like Tokyo and Vancouver. Thank you.
So Ryan, before
Thanks.
you ask anything else, I was told that both Keith and myself could add some comments to something else because,
Sure,
you know,
go ahead.
give us 90 seconds to talk about the gorilla in the room, like you said. Just a perspective, though, from the standpoint of my own personal experience and why this is so difficult. Because clearly, even Kirk said the other day he's willing to bypass Hart, take the council, go directly to Washington. He doesn't really know what they're doing. After the primary, you know, when I went from being 1 to 2, you know, I called Andy Robbins on that Monday morning and asked for an appointment to go sit down with him to really try to figure out, now that I was in a situation where maybe I could get some answers. And I had to wait the whole week because he was moving, went to his home that Friday night, very cordial, sat out in the back of his house in the yard, and for 90 minutes asked him questions. And I would tell you more than half of those questions were met with the answer of, I can't tell you unless you get elected. I can't tell you unless you get elected. So, you know, asking us the aspiration is one thing. You know, but the reality is there's just so much in making a big business decision, which is what you're asking us about. And for this audience especially, you know, if you're trying to make it in a vacuum and you don't really know the facts, it's really hard to come off with what's straight. It's more aspirational than anything. So I'll just close it with this. I've said this long ago, and it's been one of the guiding principles for me in business. If the numbers don't make sense, the strategy doesn't make sense. And that's what we have to evaluate right now, because our aspirations and our beliefs prior to a pandemic has now been preempted by 8 months of a pandemic and a situation that you just said, we lead the country in business closures, and we've still got a very high unemployment rate. Trying to make this decision under those circumstances, for what it's worth, is almost unfair to either one of us. So I just want to just be able to say that on rail, because there's a lot we're going to learn once we get in the job and have the authority along with the responsibility. Thank you.
Yeah, and certainly thank you for your views on, you know, holding, you know, Hart accountable. I want to go back to what you folks both had mentioned about the TOD and that being an important component of the rail. You know, we've been touting, or the administration has been touting, a lot of this P3 notion of the public-private partnership to help, you know, build the stations, to get the private sectors to help out in that. But, you know, we haven't really seen that come to fruition yet. So, you know, as mayor, do you support this P3 process in helping to bridge the budget gap? Keith?
Well, to follow up on the previous question, I want to make clear that I'm saying that rail needs to be finished to Ala Moana as planned for a lot of reasons, including the fact that we can't afford to give the $800 million that we've already received from the FTA for the rail project, because we promised to complete it to Ala Moana. I also don't want to risk forfeiting the additional $740 million that's coming from the federal government as part of its subsidy to complete rail to Ala Moana. But having said that, I'm not going to raise real property taxes for the rail project. I'm not going to bankrupt the city to have rail completed. We have time to figure things out. Let's hear from the Hart Board and Andy Robbins as to what they think about the viability of P3 to finish the last leg of the rail project. We also have 2 years approximately to figure out what we're going to do. There's still utility relocation that needs to be done on the final leg of the rail project before you can start building the rail. There's also property acquisition that hasn't been completed on the final leg of the rail project. So let's not be hasty about what we're going to do about rail. Let's be thoughtful. Let's hear everyone out. Let's see if the federal government will provide even more money through another stimulus package that'll help infrastructure projects like rail. And then let's also look at a design build option as well, if we really need to make the numbers pencil out. And then finally, let's look at modifying the final leg of the rail project to see if we can reduce expenses to get it completed all the way to Ala Moana. Thanks.
Rick, what are your views on the P3?
Well, when I received the endorsement from the Carpenters Union, the one promise and commitment I made to them is I would not do anything hasty, that I would fight for this project with everything we had. I think it's clear, however we decide to finance it, whatever we have to do, and I believe we're going to require a lot more federal money. And I'm confused right now, quite honestly, with the position of the P3, because all of that is secret and very confidential. And we obviously have a disconnect between our mayor right now and Hart on their proposal. But I also would not raise property taxes. We won't bankrupt the city. This is really going to come down to a matter of how can we pay for it. And I've said repeatedly, I'm less concerned about forfeiting $800 million than I am more about triggering and getting the release for the 744 they're holding, and maybe a lot more than that. I also think we may have to go to a different kind of a public-private placement. We may even look to what we're doing locally. We want to look at every possibility we can to get this project done, but we're going to have to do it in reality. And when you talk about, utilities, the engineering challenges right now, which nobody's really talking about that, are really extensive, which is why things have been so expensive. And they're still going through that. And to the cost of those delays, it's $1 million a day right now in not getting the utilities, not getting that done down the Dillingham corridor. So this is just a function of money, a lot of money. I want to make the smartest business decision we can, but I'm prepared to fight for this project to the end.
Okay, well, I think we beat that gorilla down to a pulp there. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about some of the social issues facing our city right now. And let's start off with homelessness, right? Because it doesn't take, it's not hard to see, when you take a walk in the park, you're seeing all the remnants of homelessness. And so what I'd like to know is, what you would do, Keith, we'll start off with you, to address the ongoing homeless problem that plagues our city.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm gonna rail to death for like 10 seconds and then move on to the homeless question. TOD is because it's represents potentially billions of dollars in construction along the rail line, thousands of housing units, and then millions of dollars every year in additional real property taxes to the city, because the real property tax base will be heavily increased due to the rail projects along the TOD line. Homelessness is a huge issue, just like rail. It's affecting every community. It's a function of several things. First, a sheer lack of affordable housing. I have a detailed Housing for All plan that seeks to address the 22,000 unit shortage of housing here on Oahu. And one of the functions of the lack of affordable housing, obviously, is the high cost of housing. I've spoken to many, many families across Oahu during the 13 months plus that I've been campaigning. Their biggest issue, their biggest challenge is not affording to be able to live in Hawaii or on Oahu in particular. Their biggest challenge is not being able to pay for housing. It's too big a chunk of their monthly earnings, and we need to build more housing. It's supply and demand, simply put, as everyone in this audience knows. So that's going to be one of my priorities. We also need to beef up our mental health services and our substance abuse treatment services. Both of those treatment services have been greatly reduced over the past couple of decades in Hawaii for whatever reason. We need to restore the treatment services to the appropriate level to get people on the street the help they need. Housing, mental health treatment services, substance abuse treatment services, and finally, public-private partnerships like Kahawiki Village. Thank you.
Rick, what's your plan for the homeless problem?
Well, the homeless problem probably single-handedly had more to do with making my decision to run for mayor than anything, because of the extensive work I've been involved with over the last decade and the frustration, quite honestly. Because what's clear, if you look at just the last 8 years, the point in time count, which I don't buy, which is under 5,000, has remained flat. We know the compassionate disruption doesn't work, okay? And there are a lot of different layers to homelessness. In fact, we have a whole new burgeoning layer right now of the at-risk homeless. These are the people who very well could be evicted from their homes if some kind of relief doesn't become available to them, or for that matter, their landlords, who really have been granting a lot of forbearance, but there comes a point in time, which is why money is so important. So I am really humbled by the hard work and dedication of so many people, Partners in Care, the IHS, whatever, working with our homeless populations. I would tell you that I think that the homeless number is really 3 times at a minimum. If you talk to homeless service providers, about 15,000 people versus the 5,000. But to me, still yet, that's a scalable problem. That's 1% of our population. Yet it is in everybody's face and on everybody's top of mind. I can tell you through a lot of research over a lot of years, even in Hawaii News Now, this is the number 1 issue. What we've been doing doesn't work. We need more facilities to treat these people, especially our chronic homeless, where I intend to put a big focus, a big spotlight, a lot of action, and a lot of priority on the homeless issue. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to Keith on the homeless. You mentioned housing being a big component. We'll talk about that after this topic here, but what are some things that we can do now from your perspective to combat it? Because obviously housing takes time and everything else. Are there certain programs that we can institute on day one?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to just focus on the mental health services part. And some of you may know, my mom has suffered from mental illness for most of her adult life, and it's frustrating, it's difficult. So I know firsthand how hard it is to find mental health services for people out there that need it. And so it's a personal objective of mine. I know firsthand the challenges that families face. And so I'm committed to do what I can to increase those types of services. But as I mentioned in my last answer at the tail end, let's continue the successful partnerships that have taken place in the realm of reducing homelessness on Oahu. Before I ran for mayor, I was heavily involved in the Kahawiki Village project that some of you may be familiar with. It's the project near Ke'ehi Lagoon. It was a great partnership of state, city, nonprofit, and the private sector coming together to build a community of 144 homes in about a year and a half. Record time, really, by Oahu standards when it comes to constructing homes. And it got 600 people off the streets, 144 families in those units, including 300 children. What I like about that project is it's a community. It's beyond the 444 homes. There's vegetable gardens, daycare center, a preschool, a police substation, social services center. We need to do more of those Kahawiki Village projects. We also need to do more like what Twinkle Borge is doing at Honua o Waianae. I visited with them about a month ago, and she's doing great things out there. There's a lot of existing partnerships that are successful across the island. We just need to keep doing more of those and replicating them. It's going to take teamwork, just like addressing COVID and the effect on our economy, Ryan. It's collaboration and getting partnerships with all the various stakeholders here on Oahu. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Let's shift to talk about the housing, because obviously the housing is needed at all levels within our state, not just the affordable side, but even at the mid tiers. We're one of the most expensive cities to live in, and affordability has not gone up and kept pace with the rising costs. So, what is your plan to support the housing industry when you take office, and is that going to be any different from what has been done before? Rick, you can take that first.
Well, the model, as I understand it right now, says we're going to have a shortage of 65 to 65,000 homes between now and 2025, of which another within that 22,000 plus looking at affordable rentals. You know, we can't keep constructing, doing construction at $400 to $500 a square foot. We need to take a look at being able to do something a lot less than that. And I really like, among many other propositions and talking to developers and different incentive things we could do, I really like Bill 7. I think it was a brilliant piece of legislation that was put through, which really has a lot to do with, you know, rezoning existing permanent lands. It was passed into law unanimously by the city council, signed by mayor. It's a 5-year program. And it really has a lot to do with existing parcels in the urban core. And quite honestly, could probably provide in the next 4 years, if it had the political will. They spent a year stumbling around and finding reasons not to do it, could probably produce 22,000 affordable rental units on these lots. We need to create that kind of stimulus. So we have not even talking about it so far, but to the point, because we could talk philosophically. We have a major problem in DPP. It has to get corrected. It has to get corrected as soon as possible, but that's not an easy fix. It's not going to happen overnight. But if we want to build and build homes effectively and efficiently, because time is money, we've got to look right there at that systemic problem of getting DPP fixed. And there are a lot of good concepts and good developers and possibilities that we could do with waivers and all kinds of other incentives. Thank you.
Keith, your turn to tackle that question on the housing.
Yeah, well, you know, I alluded earlier to my Housing for All plan that seeks to address the severe shortage of housing here on Oahu. It's a very detailed plan. It's the only plan I know of that was presented by any of the mayoral candidates. It focuses on 3 areas: building housing for Oahu residents and not out-of-state residents, curbing the activities or actions that raise the cost of housing here on Oahu, like the 8,000 illegal vacation rentals that are still all across the island. Those need to be returned to Oahu residents for rent or purchase. And then finally, helping the private sector develop more homes in the urban core, whether that's providing the necessary infrastructure that's a precursor to development, or allowing higher building limits or building heights or increasing density. This is where transit-oriented development comes into play and will be a very important part of our housing issue. I mentioned earlier that the rail stations are a prime location in which to build affordable housing, and that's what I'm going to focus to do as your next mayor. In terms of Bill 7, that is a good bill, and I applaud Mel Kanashige and Marshall Hung for seeing that bill through passage, but it's just one part of the affordable housing equation. Bill 7 is mainly focused on building small, low-rise apartment buildings. None of the building permits, or just one of them, has been approved since the year it's been passed, and no housing units have been built. So that's just one portion of a big overall plan to build more housing.
Well, I just want to say one thing about that, Ryan, that this is a brilliant piece of legislation, okay? And, you know, and Bill 7 changes the codes for small parcels of land in apartment and mixed-use zoned areas, and allows walk-up rental buildings to be built for tenants who make 100% or below. It allows construction because you already have sewer lines and electricity and other things that we can do to create waivers. It allows the construction to come off at $250 a square foot potentially. And just because, and actually Keith's number is wrong, there's been more than one project. They've actually got 17 now at works, but part of the problem is it's gotten delayed internally in the Department of Planning and Permitting. If you've got a piece of legislation, you've got to be able to facilitate that. So here's what I'm going to say in a nutshell, very simple math. If you're building at $400 to $500 a square foot, there's only so much you're going to be able to do at a certain price point and who you're building it for. If you can build at $250 a square foot, that now makes it affordable for a large percentage of the people who that's all they can afford. And that's what we have to build. You have to build to market. I said earlier, we have demographics that have shifted. We've got families, multiple jobs per household, living paycheck to paycheck. If we're not building according to that, then what are we doing? It doesn't make any sense. And that's part of the problem we have. So we've got to be smart about our design build, and we've got to build to the market. Thank you.
And, you know, I don't think anyone's going to argue that we need more housing and we need to start building this thing. And so that really leads us to talk about, you know, how do we get these things approved over at the DPP? Because, you know, these permits are taking years when they really should be taking months and days. So, you know, what do you think the current problem is in the backlog for the permits and why they're taking so long to be approved, and what are you going to do as mayor to speed up the processing of these permits? Rick, let's start with you.
Well, one of the things that nothing's going to be easy about this. This is a major, major undertaking, but we have the benefit of the city audit that was done in 2019. It laid out in really great detail all the dysfunction, if you will, and the systemic issues, from the leadership of the department to staffing, to morale, to the processes being employed, the lack of modernization. I mean, this thing needs a complete overhaul. And so while I said it won't get done right away, I'm anticipating putting in a very strong leader with a can-do attitude, in sync with my attitude about being held accountable, being responsible to make things happen. And so we can't afford to do that. Construction is going to be a big part of our economic recovery. And if we need to just shift gears and move now towards the greater good. So DPP is widely known at all levels as being part of our systemic failure and creating additional costs, you know, in our housing markets. So we're going to fix that under this crisis and because of these circumstances. The department hasn't worked for a long time. People have known that. It's just gotten progressively worse. I don't want to sound cliche. Keith has mentioned it. I'll say it again. It's about political will. This is about a difference in leadership, and this is about making things happen. And that's what this whole election and this point in time is all about. Thank you.
Keith, what can we do at DPP to streamline things?
Well, one of the few times Rick and I are in indeed agreement. It's political will. That's plain and simple. There's been an audit that Rick mentioned that was issued in January. It clearly states the problems. It clearly states what needs to be done. We need someone who's going to get in there and make sure it gets done. It's interesting about DPP. It's the one unifying issue that brings together the public, the construction industry, the commercial real estate industry, the developers, and even the environmentalists, all together unified in their displeasure with the way things are working at DPP right now. So I'm committed to fixing that. That's one of the top priorities. We need to get the permit approved much sooner. It's not only a source of frustration for developers and homeowners alike, it's an economic issue too. You know, these developers, especially that are wanting to build housing, every month of a delay is millions of dollars in cost to them in many cases. That's totally unacceptable. So the solutions to improve DPP are in three areas. Number one, increase the number of workers at DPP. Number two, improve the technology at DPP, where everyone acknowledges is woefully inadequate and outdated. And third, process the permits faster, approve them, and focus more on the inspection and enforcement on the back end. Thank you.
You know, there's been some municipalities, you know, on the mainland that have privatized part of the permitting process. You know, one in Washington State has made this expedition process of expediting. You pay a fee for it, and a third-party reviewer would look at it, who's, you know, from the private sector. They've been able to do this within, you know, days and weeks. Is that something that we could institute over at the Department of Planning and Permitting, Rick?
I think we need to be open to anything that really we believe is going to work. So I think whether if we think there's a best practice out there that will get us over this hump, is something that we could be doing, and the right people are there I would be open to any and all of that. I think we're going to need ideas. You know, we're way beyond just saying we need to improve. This is really going to be truly about innovation. You know, I like to say and remind people that we are in the first year of the third decade of the 21st century. We know we have really outmoded situations. And while from a cultural standpoint, I want to preserve anything and everything about our incredibly rich past, we need to modernize in some levels. And it may very well be that in the process of Department of Planning and Permitting, we need to privatize, or that's a possibility. I would certainly look at that. We're going to look at anything that's going to streamline the granting of permits, to get on with the business of construction, to get on with the business of creating homes and other things we need to build in every way possible. So I want to stay open to any and all ideas. It just has to be the right idea. So that's it.
Keith, are you in support of potentially privatizing part of the DPP?
Well, GPP is such an issue, such a problem right now. We can't rule anything out, in my opinion. So, you know, I'm open to.
Great. Let's shift gears now and talk about the finances of the city. You guys are going to be stuck with, you know, a budget that you're going to have to contend with when you take over. It's, you know, not looking pretty. So, you know, tell us how you guys are going to balance this budget, you know, with less in revenue and increase in expenses. Something's got to give, right? Either you're going to have to cut the expenses, and if that's the case, what are you guys going to cut? And then if you need to increase revenues, maybe raising taxes, what is it that you're going to raise, Keith? Keith, you're still there? I think he's frozen. Maybe we'll, in the meantime, have Rick answer that.
Sure. Well, the budgets are going to be a big thing, because the first thing that happens is you walk in the midst of this, you know, economic recovery, and we've got 6 months of a budget that was done considerably time, you know, a while ago. So that's the first part of business, is to determine, you know, from the standpoint of where our variable expenses are, because I do believe we're going to have to go into belt tightening. My goal, my commitment is not to raise property taxes. I don't want to put a single one of our 8,400 city and county workers out on the street. Now is not the time to add to our unemployment. But there are a lot of variable expenses. There are redundancies. There's possibly some waste I want to look at. Almost simultaneous with that, as we get our feet on the ground with a new team, new city council, within 60 days, we need to produce the 22 budget. The budget at the city level is really a policy statement. It's about where you put your priorities and how I'm going to look at it, what we release monies to and where we spend monies. So I will be involved and really want to look at things that we can absolutely do without, keeping our core businesses intact, of everything we need to do to run the city effectively and as efficiently as possible. And at the same time, look to appropriate monies on where we can do to impact jobs, because we're going to have a lot of people still looking for work that don't have jobs to go back to, and we want to be able to do that. So I think the first 90 days, and we just put out last night our roadmap to recovery plan, is going to be a lot involved with the budget. Our budget expenses have been going up on average 5% a year. And that was okay 2 years ago when you had these increases in tourism. And, you know, we had $17.8 billion in tourism and $2 billion in tax revenue. That was all well and good, but we're not going to be able to cover that now. We're going to have to look really hard at where we spend our money and make those kinds of decisions. Thank you.
Keith, I'm glad you're back to join us. We were just talking here and right in the nick of time, you came back. So it's your turn to tackle the question about the state's finances or the city's finances. What has to give? Expenses, you know, revenues. What would you cut? What would you raise?
Okay, sorry, I forgot. I mean, tell me the question, because I got cut out pretty early.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the question was, you know, in terms of stabilizing the city budget, you know, what are your plans on the tough decisions that you would have to make, whether you're going to have to cut expenses, and if you do cut an expense, what will you cut? And if you do need to, you know, raise revenues, how would you raise those revenues?
Okay, so I mean, here's where we are in terms of the city's finances. There was a generous surplus from the previous fiscal year to the current fiscal year of nearly $200 million, which helps the city right now. There was the $387 million in CARES Act funding that the city received several months ago to help with COVID-19 related relief. In terms of real property tax collections for the current fiscal year, the city has collected about 89% of what is due from the taxpayers for the first of two installments, as those of you who know must pay real property taxes. However, the October and November installments haven't been collected yet, of course. And so the collections have been fairly good up to this point, in fact, stronger than expected. In terms of looking ahead to next year, Ryan, real property tax or real property values are still strong, as we've seen by the Oahu median price for homes last month. I think it was a record high of $880,000. So in terms of making tough decisions, I don't know if we're there yet, but if we have to make tough decisions, first and foremost, the city needs to preserve public safety. I mean, that's the core service, the most important function of the city, and those monies need to be preserved as much as possible. In terms of the long run of increasing city finances and city coffers, it's TOD and building along the rail line. That's a huge potential for development, for the construction industry, and to increase the city's real property tax base. Thank you.
So you spoke about real property taxes. Rick had mentioned, he's not going to touch that. It's a sanctity. Keith, would you touch real property taxes in terms of raising it?
No, not now. I mean, the real property taxes have been increased quite a bit over the past several years, and people are hurting during this pandemic. So no, no plans to raise real property taxes.
There is, if I might add, there is one caveat. There is a possibility of raising on vacant homes. That's a possibility because we have a considerable number of vacant homes that could be taxed. I'm not sure, I don't know how to quantify that yet with respect to the yield, but that's a possibility. The only other thing I want to say, and this is somewhat in disagreement with Keith, and while I understand those numbers, I just have a hard time believing we're so many months into this pandemic and knowing full well that tourism, our number one industry, is going to come back slow. That if this is not a setting for some probably long overdue belt tightening, we've talked repeatedly now about willpower, whatever, but I think it would be the prudent thing to do. And I just can't imagine going in and thinking we're going to have enough surplus because of a carryover or the property values and the valuations have held up, that now would not be a good time for the future of our city to look at things that we need to do that probably should have been done, lack of political willpower, use this crisis as a silver lining that it could be to make some really strong adjustments that would allow us to operate more effectively and more efficiently. That's a different viewpoint, I think, and it's something that I would really take to heart in my administration. So.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for probably just a few more questions here. So I want to talk about the vacation rental issue. There's been a lot of support for potentially legalizing vacation rentals, especially during a time in which tourism, once we get it back, there might be people who don't want to stay in a hotel. They want to be out distance and in a vacation rental out elsewhere. And obviously this could put money into residents' pockets rather than the hotel industry necessarily. So do you support legalizing the vacation rentals and potentially increasing bed and breakfast here on the island? Rick, you want to take that?
Well, illegal vacation rentals ran amok in 2019. I think the estimates are anywhere from a low of 8,000 illegal vacation rentals to, I've heard as high a number as 14.5. It accounted for about 2.5 million of the 10.5 million visitors we had. And what it really did was it disrupted our neighborhoods. When tourism was confined, if you will, to Waikiki or even Turtle Bay, and certainly over the last 20 years out in Ko'olina, it's one thing. But now it's become very pervasive, not unlike homelessness in some way, and very disruptive with a lot of economic ramifications. So I would not be in favor of increasing it. I realize the housing permits have been in existence now since the 80s of granting anymore. I'd be much more concerned about the enforcement. There's a lot of talk about recalibrating tourism and talking about quality, getting to quality versus quantity, et cetera. I think we've wholesaled Hawaii before. I think, as I said earlier, we are iconic. We have such global appeal. I think we need to market differently. I'm very excited about John DeFries stepping in as the head of Hawaii Tourism Authority. All of us have had a pause now on where we want to go. Illegal vacation rentals were costly. We lost money tax-wise. We've disrupted neighborhoods. It's affected our housing market. It's just been way out of control. Department of Planning and Permitting is charged with the responsibility of monitoring that. And as was just indicated, we lack the resources to do that. So consequently, they weren't doing it. So when we talk about increasing manpower and changing the processes and changing the responsibility, or even to the point of maybe even privatizing, Ryan, as you suggested, certain elements so we can enforce the things we need to do, I want to do that. If you talk to the hoteliers, they'll tell you that in 2019, even despite that record-breaking numbers, their occupancy was actually down slightly. It was all the illegal vacation rentals, very disruptive to our home. Thank you.
So would you support legalizing the vacation rentals or just really more
I'm
enforcement?
not, no, I already said that. I'm sorry, Ryan, if I didn't make it clear. I'm not going to increase. As long as we have, with the permits we have that are zoned accordingly, I'm not going to extend that. I have no interest in doing that. You have to make a case to do that. I don't think a case could be made for that. Okay?
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Keith, your views on the vacation rentals and legalizing? You're on mute.
Yeah, Ryan, I'm not sure where your audience is on this, but personally, I'm against vacation rentals. I feel that they fundamentally alter the nature and character of neighborhoods all across Oahu. It was way out of control. Vacation rentals should be confined to resort areas like Waikiki and Ko'olina. If you live in Kailua or been to Kailua on a weekend pre-COVID-19, it was a mess. You couldn't find parking in shopping centers. You couldn't find parking at the beach. If you lived near the beach, there were rental cars all over your neighborhood, overrun by tourists and rental cars. Even if you lived in Enchanted Lake or Aikahi or anywhere else in Kailua, half your neighbors may have been tourists. I mean, that simply was unfair to Kailua residents and those across Oahu. My wife's son and I live in Paoa. I mean, there were illegal vacation rentals in our neighborhood. I mean, so I'm clearly against them. We have enough capacity in our hotels. We're not going to need those vacation rentals, Ryan, frankly, for a long time, if ever, because tourism is going to take a while to bounce back. And if I had to make a choice between providing much needed housing and increasing the housing inventory for Oahu residents versus the needs of tourists and profiteers who have vacation homes, I'm going to pick our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, and our colleagues any day over the tourists and the profiteers. Thanks.
Okay, folks, final question, and this has to do with the leadership. You guys are going to be leading our city of close to 1 million people, as well as the state and government workers, thousands of them that look up to you as the chief executive or the future chief executive. So we're short on time, so I want to give at least 60 seconds for each candidate to mention what kind of leader are you and what will you do to lead our city through the pandemic. Rick?
Thank you, Ryan. So I'll be quick. My style of leadership is rooted in my years as a college football coach. I've always been a team builder. I've always understood driving performance. And I've actually had the privilege over the course of really a 5-decade career of being in senior leadership roles. I've held the title from CEO to president to general manager. 31 of the 43 years I spent in broadcast, my work has been on display here in Hawaii and the things that we've created. And in my last endeavor, if you will, out of a broken economy in 2008, we built for Hawaii with some of the best men and women I've ever worked with, a 21st century multimedia company, which I'm extremely proud of. So, for me, it's been about bringing people together, being able to build great teams, inspiring people, taking on tough situations, turning troubled companies around. I've always been the person who was hired to replace the person they fired and said, fix it. So I think all roads have led to this challenge. My heart is here. I've lived here since 1965, and this is going to be the biggest challenge of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And your response on leadership, Keith?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised here. I'm an attorney by trade. I've had executive leadership experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. I'm very familiar with city government. I've worked with mayors, city councils, city departments, the public sector unions, who are the majority of employees in the city workforce. It's much different from being in the private sector for your entire career. I've had the experience of working with the city. I'll be able to hit the ground running. My career has been based on public service and working with communities all across Oahu. I've been in every community. I know the communities. I know the issues and challenges facing our working class families. I know the issues and challenges facing our small businesses, our restaurants, those in the commercial real estate industry. It's going to take a lot of work, collaboration, commitment, and bringing people together. That's something I've done throughout my career, and I'll continue to do that as your next mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure spending the last hour here with you, and hopefully the folks at home and at the office have gotten a better idea of where the candidates stand on certain issues that are important to them. So on behalf of CCIM and BOMA, we thank you for spending the time here today. And most of all, get out there and vote on November the 3rd. This has been a
Thank you, Ryan.
CCIM BOMA
Thank
production.
you, Tina.
Aloha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Don't forget to make your Make-A-Wish donation. We're almost there. Good seeing you.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith.
Bye.
I'm glad we were able to work out that technical difficulty.
Yeah.
I'm a
No,
little
that
worried
was
there that
me.
you weren't able to join us for the end.
I don't know what happened, but anyway, thanks you guys. Bye, Nicole. See you guys.
Thank you.
Signing out.
Bye.
Say hi to Blair and Nate for me. I know they're on the campaign. Blair Suzuki and Nate Okubo. They're both classmates of mine. So I didn't know they
Great.
were.
Good people. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Great.